This is Mang, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can start using Fusion to make real-world objects that we're going to be able to incorporate into our music devices. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a knob to go onto our rotary encoder board. So in this board, basically we're able to measure the number of positions that it changes in rotation, and also it has a little clicky button, and there's also actually a NeoPixel LED on here. And this is great, but obviously this metal shaft, maybe not the most ergonomic. You can get some existing knobs to put on there, but we're going to look at actually how we can start to create our own. One of the reasons we're going to want to do that is, as you can see with this LED, it's going to be nice if maybe our knob was clear so we could catch some of that light, and we might also want to think about other things actually other than just a round knob that we can put on there. Okay, so let's go into Fusion, and inside Fusion, once you've got it loaded up, you will want to make sure that you are in the right directory, so you can click on this one here, this data panel. This opens and closes this panel here on the left-hand side. And if you're part of the music devices class, you should have access to this music devices folder. And then you can go ahead here and you could make a new folder for yourself to hold your projects. I'm going to go ahead and make this one here called Mang. And then inside here, I'm going to do File, New Design. It's just going to open up an empty design here. And let me just go ahead and save this so I can give it a name. And let's just call it Rotary Knob. It's going to go ahead and save it. And it's important to note that Fusion is saving all of this information in the cloud. And so as long as you're logged in, it's going to upload it to Fusion servers, and you'll be able to access it anywhere that you have access to Autodesk Fusion. You are also able to download things to your own machine, but by default, it's built for using it in the cloud. Okay, so now I'm here on my rotary knob. I'm going to go ahead and close this data panel just to give us a little bit more space. And you can see you have a very blank space here in the middle. So first thing, I'm going to show you a little bit about how to navigate around, and there are some tutorials as well, and you can see there's some different kinds of ways we can navigate down here. So let's just go ahead and we can start by creating a cylinder. So you want to make sure that you're here in this solid tab. There's quite a lot of different things we can do in Fusion. For the majority of our class, we're going to be here in the solid tab, which is for creating solid objects, such as the kinds of objects we can 3D print. So if I go into this solid tab, and I want to make sure I'm here in the design section, do create, and go down here and choose a cylinder. Helpfully, as we go through these menus, Fusion actually shows us almost like a mini tutorial there, right there, just so we can see what's going to happen. So you can see here, cylinder is going to create a solid cylinder, and we're going to need to select a plane, and then we'll be able to draw the cylinder. So if I select the cylinder, you can see we get this display here with these three different planes. So Fusion is working in 3D. So if you've been working in Illustrator or Photoshop, obviously you're working in 2 dimensions. Here in Fusion, we're in 3 dimensions. So if we want to draw a cylinder, we actually have to say which plane does it start on. So since we're doing 3D printing, we're going to want to make sure that we're drawing everything, or at least this is my recommendation. So if this is going to be the bottom of the object, we would want to place that on the table, right? And this would also correspond to the build plate of the 3D printer. And so let's just go ahead and we'll select this plane as the plane for our object here. This one here, the XY plane. And now it's asking me to place the center point. And you can, one of the nice things about Fusion is you can see as I move my mouse around, it's snapping to various things. So I could create my cylinder way out here. I'm going to hit cancel. Or what I could do and what I recommend is once we've selected our XY plane here as our ground plane, get Fusion to snap into this center point, the origin, and let's use that as the center so that we are starting to draw from basically the 0, 0 point. So now as you can see, as I drag, we can see our circle for the base of the cylinder, and we can also see that we have a size in millimeters there. So another reason why we're using Fusion is by default it is designed to create things for the real world. So let's just go ahead here and let's just make it, let's say 15 millimeters. So I'm typing in 15, hit enter. So now it's 15 millimeters in diameter. And here we can drag to set the height. And you'll also notice that over here on the right-hand side, we are also able to set those parameters directly. We can also type numbers directly into here. So let's just go ahead here into the height and let's just make it 5 millimeters tall. And you can see here in the operation, it's saying new body. What that means is it's going to create a new solid, which is not connected to anything else, a new body. Hit OK. And so now I've got my little cylinder here, and I can click these different icons down here for different ways of moving around the scene. There are a bunch of shortcuts on the using like the shift key and scrolling on the trackpad. So on the Mac, if I just scroll with 2 fingers, I can scroll it around. And if I hold shift, I can rotate. And it's pretty easy actually to get a little bit lost sometimes with the rotation of your objects. One super helpful thing is if I move my mouse over here to this cube, it's going to show me where I am. And you can see here, this is supposed to be the top. And if you ever get lost or you just want to reset the view, just go here and click on this home icon here. And what that's going to do is it's basically just going to set us back to this sort of isometric view with everything visible. So I use this all the time because, for example, maybe I want to look at the bottom of the object, so I might grab this cube over here and rotate it. And then if I want to get back to the normal view, I just go home. Okay, another tip here is over here in this sort of document hierarchy or document graph. I'm not sure exactly what the name of it is. We can toggle the visibility of different things. So here is my body, and I could turn that on and off if I want to see it. This one here, the origin, this is something that I generally leave on. So if I turn this on by clicking the little eye icon here, you see here I've got those 3 planes again, and there's red, green, and blue dotted lines. Those are the axes. So these correspond to the X in red, the Z in blue, and there's a green one for the Y behind. I find this is a little bit handy in terms of being able to see very easily where that 0, 0 point is. So okay, so I'm going to click home up here to get us back to our regular view. So we've got our first body, and what we're going to do now is we are going to go in and cut a little bit of that out in order to make our knob. So if we look at our physical rotary encoder here, the basic idea is it has a circular shaft with a little bit cut out of it. It's called the D shaft because it looks a bit like the letter D. And if we look into the existing knob, we can see that there is this sort of D shape in there. So basically what we want to do is we want to take our cylinder, the top of the knob here, and we want to cut this sort of D shape out of it. Or we want to end up with this D shape in there. So one way we can do that is by cutting out a cylinder from the inside of this and then adding back in that little piece. So let's do that now. And what I would do if I was trying to match an existing object is I would take these calipers. So these are useful for quite precisely measuring distance. and I would use these to measure the object. For a lot of different switches and things like that, you can also find CAD files online or dimensions online. But there's no substitute sometimes for being able to actually measure yourself. So let's just go ahead and measure that. I am going to zero this out. That's pretty close, yeah, 0, 0, 0. This is in millimeters. And let's see, so I have, looks like the shaft is 6 millimeters wide. So let's go ahead and make another cylinder that's 6 millimeters wide and cut that out of our nifty knob. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another body, another cylinder. So if I go in here and say click create, and then cylinder again. Now again, it's asking me which of these planes I want to use. So let's go ahead and click on the XY plane again, since that's going to be the bottom of our object. It's asking us to place the center point. So I'm going to hover over the origin here, this dot where those 3 lines for the axes meet. And then I can specify the diameter of the circle. And if you remember, I said it was 6 millimeters wide. That's what I just measured. So I'm going to put in 6 millimeters. And now it's asking me for the height. And I can click and drag. And if you remember, we had, I think we made it 5 millimeters tall. So maybe here we could make it, let's say, 3.5 millimeters. So I'll go over here, and if I want to be exact, 3.5 millimeters. And if you look over here on these properties, you can see it's changed the default operation. So when we created the first cylinder, it created a new body, which created a new cylinder. We can also cut. So if we do that, we're going to use this new body to cut out of the other one. We could join them together. That would make more sense if this one was creating is longer. So if I do join, we'll get a new object that has this shape. In this case, if I wanted to do cut, so I'm going to cut this new cylinder out of the old one. And I want to leave a little bit there at the top. So let's just change this. I can kind of eyeball it. I could measure it, and then I could maybe just tweak it so it's a little bit more exact, let's say. So let's go ahead and put 3.5 millimeters. Now Fusion is doing the math. And what I can see is that I now have this object where I have our circular knob, and we've got this little piece cut out. Okay, so now all we need to do is we need to add in the piece that is going to fit in here to keep the knob from just freely spinning. So what I could do here, I could also measure, and I can see that this, the width here is 4.5 millimeters, and the whole thing we said was 6 millimeters. So basically what that means is that this slot comes in 1.5 millimeters from the outside, and then because this is 6 millimeters, it actually also comes in 1.5 millimeters from the center. Sometimes I like to do a little hand-drawn sketch, actually, even before I start Fusion. We'll be looking at that in a future episode. Okay, so let's go back into our Fusion drawing here. We can hit save, Apple Fs on the Mac, and you'll notice here we can actually name our version. So if we wanted to go back later, we could go back to the specific version. I'll just call it Simple Donut because we don't have that slot yet. And now what we're going to do is we'll go into the Create menu here. And this time we're going to make a box because we want to make the flat part that's going to fit into the inside of that space for the shaft there. So I'm going to create a solid box. Again, I need to select a plane. Sometimes I find it's easier to rotate the object. So for example, I can get directly to the bottom. So I'm going to select, again, this XY plane that's going to allow us to going to allow us to build off of the build plate of the 3D printer. And you can see it's asking me to place the first corner. What I can do is, if you look closely here, if I hover over the origin and then drag out here, did you notice here how the, it's maybe a little hard to see in the video, but the line here is dotted. And what that's doing is Fusion is going to constrain where I click to snap to that line. So I'm going to select a point here, and now it's asking me the size of the rectangle, and I'm just going to make it, say, this big. And so now I've got this rectangle which is perfectly along one of the lines, the x-axis here, and I can push my rectangle up to turn it into a box. And what I want to do in this case is I want to go up into the top here, and this time I don't want to cut out this part. I want to join them together. So let's just see what would happen if I just choose the default cut. Well, now I'm cutting this piece out, which wasn't what I wanted. One of the amazing things of Fusion is that it keeps all of the operations that you do in this area down here, the timeline, and we're actually able to go back. We're actually able to go back in time and change the parameters of things, and most of the time it's able to recalculate everything. So I can go back here to this box that I created, and I could double click here, and it's going to open up this edit again, and I can change the operation from cut, which is going to cut the piece out, to join, which is going to join the piece in. So now you can see I have the D shape, but if you remember, this side I said was supposed to move in 1.5 millimeters. So what I can do is I can click on this operation here, and I want to move it, but if I move this body that has already been all moved together, it's actually going to move the entire object. So what I actually want to do is I'm going to go back into where we created this box, and actually instead of join, I'm going to put in a new body and hit OK. And so now actually if you look over here and we expand this bodies, you can see we've got this part for the knob, and we've got this part for the, let's call it the tab, that's going to keep it from rotating. And they're actually two separate objects, they're two separate bodies. So now if I go into modify and move, now I'm able to actually select this object here, and then I'm able to click and drag and move just this part, which is the tab. So I said it was 1.5 millimeters, so I'm just going to type that in there. And now we have two separate bodies. We have them in the locations that we want, but they're not joined together. So if I turn this off, the visibility of body 2, and I turn it on, you can see that they're not actually joined together. They're kind of just overlapping, let's say. One thing I find really useful in Fusion is renaming the things that you create. So if I click on here and then right click, I can rename this, and I could just call this knob. And if I rename, I could rename this one to, let's just call it tab. And now you can see that we have just the tab showing, just the knob, and they're actually two separate things. So in order to properly be able to 3D print this, we need to change it into one solid object. I'm just going to turn off the origin now just so it doesn't get in the way. And we can do this with these modify commands up here. So if I click here, what I'm able to do is to combine objects. So if I click on combine, we're going to be able to do those same kinds of operations where we join them or use one to cut, and we're able to do that explicitly. So I'm going to click on combine. It's asking me to select the target body. So this is the body that we're going to do things to. So I'll click that one. And then the next one, and it automatically switched over, it's asked me to select the tool body. This is the body that we're going to use as what's called the tool to either add or subtract or intersect with the first body, which is the target. So if I click on this one, then you can see here I have these operations, join. So we can see now this is actually going to join it into one object, which is what we want. Other things I could do is I could cut them. I could also intersect them, which would basically just give me the parts where they overlap. So let's go back to join, and I'm going to hit OK. And we can see now that we actually have a nice looking knob. And if we look over at our shaft, the basic idea is that this shaft is going to fit into the slot on the bottom of the knob. So we now have our object ready to export. So what I would recommend right now is to save it. Sometimes I would say for printing, or I might say printed on Sunday, February 23rd. So now I've saved my file, and we want to check that we just have this one solid body. We want to make sure we don't have a bunch of separate pieces. It needs to be this one solid piece. Now here, if I go on to right click, I can save this particular body as a mesh. And what that means is we're going to be able to save it as a solid object in a very simple file format called STL, which is going to allow us to load this object into our 3D printing slicing software. So I did right click and save as mesh. You want to make sure in here that actually you have it set for export, and you can see here it says export selected invisible bodies as 3MF, STL, or OBJ. STL is the simplest format. This is the one that I would probably recommend for getting started. And what this is going to do is it's going to take this object, which is a Fusion body, which has all sorts of stuff being calculated, and it's going to turn it basically into a very dumb mesh composed of triangles. So if we click on preview, we can see that what's going to happen is it's going to take that object that we created and it's going to triangulate it into 1,000 triangles. I'm just going to turn that off. And now if I hit OK, we're going to be able to save this as an STL file. And there's two options here. We can save it into the cloud, which we might want to do. And it's also able to save it to your computer. So let's just call this a simple rotary knob, 6mm shaft. So that has now saved it to my computer. And believe it or not, that is all we need to do to be able to actually start printing this. So just a quick recap. We went into the data browser. We found, went to home, we found the music devices project. We went into our own folder and created a new design. Then we created a cylinder. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go step back through the timeline here in Fusion. It's also pretty cool. We can actually move this little pointer here, and we're actually moving back in time. So let's go back. So at the very beginning, we had nothing, right? Completely white screen. Then we created this cylinder. We set the dimensions of the cylinder to what we need the real-life object to be. If I wanted to change things, I can even go all the way back to this very first operation and change it. So for example, if I wanted to make it quite a bit larger, 20mm diameter, I can do that. And then if I go back to the end of the timeline, you can see it's actually recalculated everything and even put the, we still have the little kind of keyhole here in the same place. This is one of the huge advantages of Fusion, particularly for 3D printing where we might need to do some, a little bit of adjustment here, for example, to get this to fit perfectly. Okay, so we went back, we created our cylinder. Then the next thing we did is we created this cylinder and we subtracted it out by doing cut. So if I click here and show you here in the edit feature, we made a cylinder and we cut it out. Then we created a new body. So we created this separate object here. So we have this rectangle that we created, or this box, and we actually created it as a separate body. And then the reason we did that is so we were able to actually move it over to where we need it to be. And then we manually did this combine operation to combine those pieces together. Once we had everything the way we liked, we saved our file. And then to export it, we did right click here on the body that we want to export, save as mesh, and we did export as a STL with millimeter units. So that's basically it for creating a simple object. There is, of course, tons more available in Fusion. It is a very professional tool that is used by professionals, but there's all sorts of stuff. This is enough for us to start actually playing around. You can see there's some other pretty simple kind of primitives that we can make, like spheres and donuts. And in future episodes, we'll be looking at how we can expand a little bit on what we've done.